I believe there is a dogman killing all my pigs, and I have no idea what to do about it. I have a little house here, out in the backwoods, and my husband and I own several acres of thickly wooded game land. I love having this area because I love to raise and rescue pigs in need. I have downsized in the past couple years and, until recently, only had a litter of 6 young pigs. They have a good-sized pen out back, and I let them out every day in free roam. It's been exceptionally warm for winter this year, so I've been letting them out more and more every day. Now, they're all dead. I suspect it might be a dogman, or a possible Bigfoot taking my pigs. I don't know what other conclusion to come to. No other known predator does what it did to my pigs. About a month prior to now, I had noticed 2 of my pigs missing from the litter. This was odd. It's impossible for them to leave their pen. There is no way they can get out. My heart was racing. I thought someone had broken in and stole 2 pigs out of my pen in the night. I didn't even hear anything, not once. I am a light sleeper, so I would know if something was going on with my pigs. As I was walking away from the pen, going to look for them, I noticed a faint trail of blood that led off towards the woodline. I expected the worst. A bear or something probably got to them, I thought. I approached the woodline, and not even 10 feet, I saw both of them, hanging 30 feet up in a big fir tree. They were disfigured from being smashed against the tree, their intestines strewn throughout the branches they were on, and blood had drained from them entirely. Blood was all over the base of the tree, with blood running down the tree from the scene of gore above. The sight alone made me retch right there on the ground. I knew we had a cougar or bear that was doing this. When my husband arrived home later from work, I had him investigate the mess, and he looks at me, pale as a ghost, and says no cougar or bear are going to store their food that high in a tree, let alone kill the pigs the way it was. My husband, partially climbing and using a ladder, got both of the bodies down to bury. It was worse than I thought. It looked to be that these pigs were slammed up against a tree so hard they popped. The amount of force these pigs were killed with was disturbing. Both eyes on both pigs looked to be popped out from pressure. Some even had teeth missing. Their torsos were completely blown out and smashed. We looked closely and couldn't find any signs of them being eaten on. Even the tree base that was soaked in blood looked a little deformed from how hard these pigs were thrown up against this tree. What kind of predator does that to its prey? My husband and I were scared shitless. I needed to find out what we were dealing with. We set up game cams all around the pen and bear traps disguised under brush. The next few nights were uneventful. I mourned the loss of my 2 piglets, but continued to take care and love the other 4. I kept a pistol holstered to my hip and my husband's rifle right by the door. I began to not get good feelings being outside, constantly felt watched and observed by someone. I would look around, even sometimes grabbing my husband's rifle with the scope and searching around, just to see if I could see something. I never did see anything, but the feelings were still there. Things continued like this for about 10 more days when I came out the next morning to a gruesome scene. The door that was on the pin was torn off and thrown away about 50 feet from the pin. The actual metal gating of the door was torn. Blood, guts, and pieces of what was left of my 4 pigs laid all over the place. It looked like a slaughterhouse. I sobbed so hard. I screamed and cried for my husband to come home, and that we were in danger. Keep in mind the ominous feelings never ceased. My husband came home and about shat himself at the sheer amount of blood and gore in the pen. He was scared and kept telling me no animal does this. Those pigs weren't even eaten. They were just torn into shreds. Again, I never heard anything while I slept during the night. This was done silently. My husband called the police. An officer arrived and took a look at the scene himself. Told us this was a bear attack, that we were irresponsible enough to leave food out to attract a bear to lead to this, and left. Told us not to call the police again and waste their time over trivial affairs. My husband was so angry, he got into it with a cop for a good 5 minutes and almost got himself arrested. That's a whole other story. I never recovered from losing my pigs, and my husband and I have no idea what it could actually be. But I have my ideas. I spent some time doing homework and trying to find out what attacks livestock and kills like that. I somehow stumbled upon Bigfoot. I haven't put much thought into the whole Bigfoot idea, but after listening to multiple stories involving Bigfoot and animals, it seems like these things take animals. Then I ended up hearing about Dogman and listening to that. I checked out several different videos of these stories, some of them actually being yours, and I had no idea these things kill like they do. I'm beginning to worry that the feelings of being watched and our pigs going missing is a sign they're in the area. My husband doesn't believe it, and I can't entirely say I do either, but it does explain a lot. We still feel uncomfortable outside. We still feel like we're being watched. Every time we leave the house, we haven't seen anything, or anything yet. I'll let you know, but for now, we're going to get more firepower, just in case. I've been talking to my grandmother recently about Bigfoot. Weird creatures and things that just can't be explained. She's never shared this story with really anyone because no one she's known has shown interest in those subjects, and she didn't want to feel crazy for telling her account. It took some convincing, but I got her to tell me the whole story of what happened to her on the farm she grew up on back in the 1940s. Before I tell you what her actual account is, I'll say that she is still a very coherent woman. No illness, no dementia. She is sharp as a tack still and is a very do-it-yourself, independent kind of woman. She's really getting up there in age and is still very mobile and healthy. She doesn't make up stories like this and simply has no reason to. On with what she told me. Back in 1940 and 1941, my grandmother and her father and family owned a small farm south of Springfield, Missouri. The family specialized in growing lots of vegetables, including but not limited to corn, tomatoes, onions, spinach, potatoes, beets, carrots, and more. World War II hadn't quite happened yet, and we're just reaching the tail end of the Depression, with the economy starting to pick back up again, from what she remembers. Things started to happen on her parents' farm. She remembers hearing these scary howling sounds way outside in the woods and around the farm at night. She said the most frightening thing about all of it was how her father reacted to it. He was a tough man and had been through a lot and knew how to handle a gun. Whatever was making those noises really put fear into him. She says as the nights grew on, she would start hearing the howling noises coming closer and closer to the house. The family had a golden retriever that went missing shortly around this time. No trace of the dog. Livestock began disappearing too, and events occurred that required the police to get involved. In the coming weeks, 2 of the hired ranchers disappeared without a trace. The police were being called in and determined both persons to be missing, and her parents were actually going to be charged with the murder and disappearance of these 2 individuals. It was later dropped when they were just determined them to be missing, and there was no foul play afoot. This all happened in a short span of time, when it got so bad they were forced to move. Her father and family lost a great farm. She never really knew what it truly was until she was a little older. Her father would never tell her what it was that terrorized their farm, but my grandmother, even at an early age, knew it was something that really scared her, just from what she had heard. My great-grandfather, my grandmother's father, passed away before I was ever born. Sometime on his deathbed, he told her about why the farm was given away and sold. He told her he believed a hellhound had come to take away their farm. This is where it gets pretty intense. She says that her grandfather had made a pact with a very powerful and renowned witch in New Orleans. This individual practiced hoodoo, which is basically demonology, and other various forms of black magic. Apparently, her grandfather made some sort of deal with him to pay this witch for power. Well, he ripped off the witch bad and took back most of his money somehow, so the witch casted demons to come after him as revenge, and his family. 2 years later, he went dead broke and ended up committing suicide. My grandmother's father was only just a boy when this happened, and was primarily raised by his mother. He explained to her that he thinks the same demons were coming after him, the same ones that sent his father to financial ruin and suicide. They supposedly manifested as hellhounds, he called them. They stood on 2 legs, were very large, the size of a moose if it stood on 2 legs, he said. Solid black with red glowing eyes. It looked more wicked and grotesque than a wolf. The way it looked at you told you it wanted to hurt you. It was straight from hell. My grandmother recounts her father getting very shaken up as he's explaining this to her. This terrified my grandmother because she had no idea even half of this was a reality at all. My great-grandfather passed away shortly thereafter. The weird thing is, my grandmother has had reoccurring nightmares with the same demon he told her about. Some nightmares it would be chasing her. Others it would get her and eat her alive. There were others, but she didn't really give me details. She said as she's gotten older, she's had them less and less, but they still happen from time to time. She's a Catholic, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it. Hey, I have something very interesting that just happened to me the other day. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so I'm able to be home with my wife and kids during the day. I have an upstairs office in which I work from. I had come down to assist my wife with making lunch for us and the kids, and I was holding our baby daughter. Our daughter was getting quite fussy, so I thought I would take her outside since it was a beautiful day. You wouldn't believe it, but it's been the warmest it's ever been during the winter. We're starting to see buds on all the plants. In fact, I think spring is coming early. It's warm enough that I step out in shorts and a shirt. Maybe we're just acclimated to the weather, but it feels like a cool spring day. My daughter immediately calms down once we're outside, and she's looking around, enjoying the sun and fresh air. We're just standing there on the porch, soaking in all the air, when I'm like, "Come on," to my daughter, decide to walk off into my wraparound driveway towards my woodshed with her in my arms. As I do, I can see off to the field to my right. This field isn't visible from my porch since I have my car parked in the way, and there's another shed blocking the vision. The scenery is breathtaking when you look out onto the field, because in the background, you can see the mountains. As I'm looking out into the field, I see this big black animal slowly walking through the open woods. It was huge. It was walking funny too, and I had no idea what I was looking at. This was several hundred yards away, and I was barefoot, basketball shorts and a shirt, with my infant daughter in my arms. I wasn't going to try and run closer to get a better look, but in hindsight, maybe I should have. It wasn't going into the woods more, it was just walking along the woodline. I don't think it saw me. It never looked over in my direction. It had a huge hunch in its back, but reminded me physically of a large black wolf, at least from the outline. I thought it was strange since we don't have any animals out here that big, besides elk, deer, cow, you name it. I went back inside and told my wife about it, and even she's intrigued. Who knows what it could have been? I'm here to basically act as a whistleblower on the wildlife management of Florida and Georgia State. I spent a lot of my free time in the national state parks, wildlife areas, and state forests. I hike for miles and miles, and I've come across over 6 dead black bears now. I've traveled through the John Bethia State Forest, up into Georgia, into the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, down into the Apalachicola National Forest, and of course, Tate's Hell State Forest. It's well known there is a thriving population of black bear here in the South, especially in Florida State, and there is nothing to my knowledge of the animal kingdom that kills them. Over the last year, in fact not even 12 months in my adventures, I've come across 6 carcasses of mangled, attacked, and bloody, beaten black bear. First time or two, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Now I'm certain something is killing these bears. I want to state that these bear carcasses I found were not small black bear either. These are full-grown adult males I'm talking about. I'm talking a good 400 to 450 pounds of black bear. I don't think we have wolves down here, so I can't say that's what it is, but these bears look like they've been attacked by a meat grinder. Chunks of their skin and flesh are missing, and they're soaked in blood and mangled up pretty badly. You'll never find these bodies on trails, only far off in the middle of nowhere like I have. When I go and adventure into these places, I go miles in, staying far away from trails to keep solitude. The bears that I find are generally by creeks, pastures, or other areas out in the open that would suggest they were attacked by something while vulnerable. The most alarming and bothersome thing I found was closer to Tate's Hell State Forest in northern Florida. I stumbled upon an area that looked to be a black bear den. It was a tiny cave that lowered into the ground with brush all around it. You can't see the front from the top, but once you come around, you can actually see that it leads down into this small, cavernous space. The smell is what got me first. I smelt death, came through the thicket, and saw blood. Climbing around and down allowed me to see what it was. This is just what I saw and what looked like happened. Something, I don't know what, pulled this black bear out of its den and ripped it in half. Its top half of its stomach was missing. Pieces of muscle, blood, tissue, and guts were pulled all over the place and partially decayed. There had already been maggots, so it could have happened a day or two prior. Remember, conditions down here for decay are highly more rapid than of the north with the heat, humidity, and all. I've never in my life seen a black bear ripped in half from the waist up. Part of its tattered spine and ribcage were partially exposed through the rotting bloody tissue and skin. I'll never forget such a horrid image. Looking down in the dirt, it looked like there was mass signs of what I would call struggle and chaos. Something went on. Looking around the bear, you can tell this thing struggled for its life and fought. Plants and dirt all around it were disturbed and ripped up. What rips the top half of a bear off and eats it? Looking around further, I found no signs of any more blood other than what was surrounding the dead half of the bear. There were no bones, nor any blood trails that would indicate a predator tore the bear in half and walked off with the other. I was flabbergasted and deeply concerned at what kind of animal or predator is out here doing this to bears. You don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you what I've seen and experienced. I'm blowing the whistle because people need to know about this. People need to know something is going on, and I believe the wildlife management know very well what's going on. I'm sure there are far more bodies, and I'm sure it's worse than we know. I doubt I'm the only one who has seen these dead black bear. Back in the late 90s, my roommate and I dabbled in black magic and summoning demons to do our bidding. Well, I should say my interest into the whole thing was very short-lived. In fact, I actually never made it that far, other than doing maybe one Ouija board session. My roommate, however, grew obsessive about it and got really involved in spells and furthering his skills, we'll call it. He always showed an interest in the dark arts before we dabbled in it, and he got serious about it. It got too much for me to deal with, and I ended up moving out afterwards, but I'll explain how it all started. So, my roommate and I had been friends for a while before we moved in together. We were both male, in our mid-20s with stable jobs while going to school full-time. We had been friends since the beginning of college. Not super close, but enough that with the given circumstances, we figured we'd be roomies and split the rent on a nice 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Originally, he was renting it and had a different roommate. The roommate moved out, and it just so happened I was looking for a place at the time, and it worked. This would have been in June, I think because I just finished my spring trimester in my college. It was hot out too. Living there was not bad for the time being, until around September-October, he kept bringing up the idea of spells and Ouija boards and controlling spirits. At first, I thought he was just messing around, but I realized he wasn't after he kept bringing it up. Then I thought he was crazy wanting to mess with that stuff. He brought home a Ouija board one day and convinced me to try it with him. On our first try, it actually worked. He led the session, and apparently, we came in contact with the original owners of the house from well over 100 years ago. It was a very old house. We ended the session and didn't really touch the Ouija board for another couple days, until I came home from class one night. He was in the living room, doing it himself, and talking to a spirit guide, is what he told me. He was asking the spirit guide about spells and how to control other entities. It really started to freak me out. I can't remember if it gave him direct answers because I didn't stay in the room. The following week, he bought a few different spell books and black magic ritual tutorials. He started casting spells in his room and other dark rituals. His personality started to change around this time and became much more reclusive. It went from him hanging out in the living room and visiting with me all the time to rarely ever seeing him. He would keep all the lights off in the house and stay locked away in his room. When I would get home and turn the lights on, I would hear him screaming at me from his room to turn them off. Of course, I screamed back and told him we need lights on. Anyway, when I would see him, he looked like he hadn't slept in days and began to look more frail and pale by the day. His behavior was really beginning to scare me. I don't remember the exact day, but I came home from class one day, and he was telling me we were going to have some nightly visitors, and that he had mastered a spell to summon night children, he referred to them as. Keep in mind, we're in a smaller house in a suburb, not too far away from college, so I don't know what he meant by this. I actually forgot all about it later on and fell asleep studying for a test. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night to a tapping on my window. I was startled awake and shot up because of the noise. I didn't have any curtains on my windows, so I could clearly see if anybody was outside my window. I turned my head, and looking at me outside my window was the scariest looking hyena thing I've ever seen. Its paw, or hand, whatever it was, pressed up against the glass, and this thing was grinning at me with glowing red eyes. It was dark, so I couldn't make out a lot of details of its fur, but it was terrifying looking. I didn't immediately think of any correlation between what I was seeing and my roommate. I quickly ran out of my room and hid in the bathroom, where I fell asleep on the toilet, waiting for this thing to disappear. I must have stayed asleep in there for a while, because I woke up and it was around 6 in the morning, and it was about time for me to get ready for school soon. My roommate wasn't home in the morning, and so I didn't see him again until that evening when I got home. He was sitting in the living room in the pitch black darkness. It was very strange, and he was really starting to disturb me. After I come in and turn on the light, I asked him why he was sitting in the dark. He ignored my question, and without making eye contact, said to me, "So, I heard you had a little run-in with one of my children." At first, I had no idea what the hell he was talking about, and then it clicked in my head. He then tells me that more will be coming, and he is controlling them to do harm to other students who have wronged him. At this point, I knew he was dangerous, but I didn't realize he was this crazy. I told him whatever, and we didn't speak for the remainder of the evening. Nothing happened that night, but as the nights continued on, I began feeling these things' presence come around. I was up late one of these nights, and my skin started to crawl, and my hair stood up. I just knew in my gut these things were outside of our house, and I didn't dare look out my window. Not even 5 minutes later, I hear my roommate outside talking. I don't know if he was talking to one of these things or what, but I couldn't make out what he was saying, just could hear his voice. This became a nightly occurrence. After a few more days of this happening, I stayed home for my morning class, and he came home from being out all night, doing God knows what. I approached him and told him he needs to knock this black magic stuff off and these creatures he's bringing around our house, and it needs to stop. He just laughed at me and went to his room and locked the door. I let him know the very next day I was going to be moving out, and he was on his own. This freaky shit has gotten way too out of hand, and it was too much for me. He never said a word during any of this. I moved out, and I guess he continued to stay there. In fact, I think he even got a new roommate on board, but I had no idea what that situation looked like. I kept my distance and stayed away from him, after all, and anyone he was friends with. I had friends saying that they were seeing freaky shit on campus though, especially at nighttime, and some friends claiming that they saw werewolves. I never said anything about what I saw because I don't know what it is I saw. I don't know if it was a demon or what the hell it was, but it scared me. After I finished college, I never came back in contact with him. Fast forward to 2006, and an old friend from college had heard through the grapevine that my old black magic roommate committed suicide back in 2004.